by the end of that hike, on the 5th day, I had so few calories left in my body that I was just exhausted. I was at the bottom of what I could do. My feet felt like concrete. My hands were losing grip on my bow. I was cold, I was exhausted, and I didn't even have enough calories in my body to keep myself warm. So before we get started in this video, guys, I wanted you to check out the sponsors of this video. Easy Veins make the best veins, the best fletching system for your arrows, so you can go out there and harvest your own meat with your own arrows through your bow. And this is going to be the fletching system that is the easiest, by far the easiest, to put on your arrows and actually make sure that they are flying straight and flying true to the target, so you can harvest more meat and you can be an apex predator yourself. So go check out the Easy Veins. They are in the link in the description below. Get yourself a discount and help support the channel at the same time. The sponsor we have today is Crafted Archery. Crafted Archery makes the arrows that I put those Easy Veins on and the broadheads that I shoot with those arrows. And again, it's all about building a tool that is going to harvest the most pure, clean, wild meat, so you can be living your best life and your best health every day. All right, without further ado, guys, let's do further. So in my last video, you saw that I was making pemmican for my backcountry hunt whenever I was doing the hunt in Utah, and I really wanted to make all of my food that I packed in there myself, and I didn't want to rely on these like Mountain House and Peak meals and things like that, because my body doesn't do very well with those carbohydrates and, you know, those pastas and things like that. So I was really nervous about trying to take anything like that in there, not to mention those dehydrated meals, like, you know, are actually pretty expensive, you know. So I wanted to take something into the backcountry with me that I made myself and prepared myself. So the first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to take pemmican. I took a couple different kinds of meat with me. The first thing was I took the pemmican. So let's first talk about the challenges that I was going to face while I was in the backcountry. One is I know that I need a good amount of protein. I'm a fairly muscular guy, and so I need to make sure that I've got plenty of protein so that I am satiated and I'm not constantly wanting to snack while I'm out there. We'll talk a little bit about how that actually kind of bit me in the ass later on in the hunt. Whenever we were going out there, I wanted to make sure I had plenty of protein and I wanted plenty of fat. So I took the pemmican with me because I wanted to make sure that, you know, I could get both of those things very easily and very simply without a bunch of filler and crap carbohydrates and things like that. If you're wondering why I didn't want to take carbohydrates with me, well, again, if you watch one of my other videos, I'll put a link up above. We're going to talk about gluconeogenesis, whenever your body is able to turn protein into glucose in order to fuel your brain and your muscles and things like that. I went into a deep dive in that, so go check that video out there. So I packed pemmican, and I also packed some dehydrated beef. I'll show you how I made that. Basically, I just bought some really cheap beef stew meat from the store, from Walmart, literally, which is basically just kind of like chopped up steak. I'm not sure exactly if it's a round steak or like a round roast or something like that, but basically about beef stew meat. And then I just seasoned it. I soaked it in some coconut aminos, and, you know, which not everybody's going to want to do that, but I soaked it in something that basically give it a little bit more flavor and also soften up that tissue so it's not super tough whenever I go to eat it. And then I seasoned it with a little bit of smoked sea salt and smoked paprika. Again, some carnivores out there don't like using any kind of like seasonings or herbs on their stuff. I'm usually okay with it because my big goal is I want to make it 90% meat or more than 90% meat in my diet here. So anyways, I seasoned it with those two things. Then I put it out on my smoker and I smoked it for a good 3 or 4 hours. After smoking it, then I went and I took it and I dehydrated it, and it made these beautiful little fatty beef chunks. I think these beef chunks were honestly what saved me for this entire hunt. So overall, I wanted fat, I wanted protein. And then, you know, there are times whenever I'm going to be exerting myself a lot, and so I brought myself some honey as well to help supplement and have a little bit of, you know, a natural carbohydrate in there. Some people don't like honey. Hey, it's up to you, man. Well, you do what you want to do. And the last thing I packed, the very last thing, as just an emergency situation, kind of backup plan B, plan C kind of thing, was I did pack a couple of these pre-made meals. They were some of the the adventure meals by Mountain House, I think is what it was. So I packed a couple of these just in case I hit rock bottom and I had nothing left to give, that I had those still in order to help back me up. I think one of the most dangerous things you could do on one of these long hunts is get yourself too far in and get too exhausted to the point where trying to get out is going to be a chore in itself. And so you need to make sure that you have plenty of fuel to stay out longer. When packing all the food, one thing you want to watch out for is you want to make sure that you have enough calories to last you for an entire day. So on average, you're going to be burning about 2,000 to 3,000 calories minimum per day from all the hiking and rucking and carrying this bag on your back and carrying all that heavy weight and your bow and doing all this. You're going to be burning at least 2,000 to 3,000 calories a day, okay? And sometimes whenever you're exerting yourself more, even your resting metabolic rate, basically the amount of calories that you burn from just sitting, is going to also be higher. So again, about 3,000 calories a day is definitely a good target to search for. I didn't quite plan this carefully enough, and so what I did is whenever I packed it in, I was going by amounts of protein and how much can fill me up. How much will one meal satisfy me, right? So I was making sure I had plenty of fat and I was making sure I had plenty of protein, but this ended up becoming a bit of a problem later on in the hunt. So one thing I wasn't really sure of was how much we were going to be exerting ourselves. So if we were doing, maybe like 300, 400 foot elevation gains up and down every day, I would have been perfectly fine. So we did that for the first 3 or 4 days of the hunt. Then on the 5th day, we did a hike up Thompson's Peak in Utah. And so Thompson's Peak is a nice high peak, and like I said, there's historically been a good amount of elk in that area. And for that hike, we ended up having a 1,200 foot elevation gain over about a 1.5 miles of a 3-mile hike. So it was an incredibly steep climb with all that gear and all that weight on our back and everything, because we had to carry our entire camp up there with us. And so that right there was a big thing that I wish I would have planned better for, wish I would have planned ahead for. So the way it all went out was the first day as we got there, and I was, we set up camp. After getting in place, we set up our tents, unpacked a lot of our gear and the things that we were going to be sleeping with for the night, and then we put our bags on our back and we headed out for a quick hunt. In this initial hunt, we didn't walk too crazy far. We only went about maybe a 1/4 mile, maybe a 1/2 mile, and we did a little bit of bugling, and then we came back to camp. We set up and everything, we cooked for the night, and I ate my pemmican for the first time. So up at this elevation, the pemmican was it was cold, obviously, because it was about, 50 degrees outside at this time of the day. So it was about 50 degrees outside, and that pemmican had set up nice and firm. Whenever I was down here on the flatter elevations down at sea level, and the warmer is about 90-95 degrees outside here in Houston, the pemmican was a little bit softer and it was real easy to break apart. Up there, it was a little bit more like a granola bar consistency, but tasted like obviously some ground beef is basically what it tasted like. So overall, the taste and the flavor of it was okay. It was a little bit mealy. Again, I wish I had gotten mine, been able to get mine a little bit more powdery so it feels more like a bar, and it'll chew and taste a little bit better, but it was like eating a whole bunch of little pebbles in there, and that was one of the biggest follies of the pemmican itself. Most of the pemmican that I brought with me had honey in it, so it had a little bit of a sweetness to it, but then it also had a little bit of that honey flavor as far as like that flowery kind of essence in it. I don't know how to describe it, that kind of herbal taste to the honey. So I had a little bit of that in it, which the honey, if it had been just a pure honey, like a clover honey or something like that, I think it would have had a little bit better flavor. But since it was a wildflower honey, it actually kind of had a bit of a, like I say, that herbal essence, and it was a little bit off-putting, but overall it was okay. Overall, the flavor wasn't bad. And overall, it was pretty satisfying. My nutritional needs were definitely met for that day, for that easy day of hiking, and everything went well. One thing I found, though, is that I did have some extra food in there. So again, I had the beef chunks, I had the pemmican, I had the honey, I had beef fat with me, and some coffee, as well as a Mountain Ops Ignite packet. So obviously I drank the Mountain Opposite Night packet with, you know, some water that we had filtered. And then I ate the pemmican, which was, again, it was perfectly fine. One thing I found out, though, when I was going through my bags, that by packing it into a Mylar bag, and whenever I brought it to Utah with me, I had to check that bag. Well, whenever it was on the airplane there, all that air expanded inside there, and some of those packages of honey popped. They actually popped, and there was honey all over all of my stuff. I didn't vacuum seal it good enough, and so the air expanded and it popped the seal on some of those bags that I packed. So I had honey all over everything, which was just a god-awful mess. So during that first evening, I did eat all my pemmican, and I did snack on some of the beef chunks, but I found myself to be full really fast. So on the second day, then we went up there. We did some hiking and some hunting and everything early in the morning before the sun ever came up, and I had myself a little bit of snack once we settled down and got a point to, you know, set and watch for some elk to try to come by to a watering spot. You know, we set up and we had a little bit of breakfast, had my coffee. Again, I had some of those beef chunks to snack on, the stew meat that I dehydrated. And then I ate a little bit more of the pemmican. And I very quickly started finding that there was one problem with packing just this type of dehydrated beef into the backcountry with me. The first problem that I had with it was, it was actually dehydrated beef, and so I felt like I needed a ton of water. So I already drink a lot. Obviously I'm a caffeine addict very much as well, and so I drink a ton of water because, you know, caffeine is a diuretic. It makes you pee a lot. Well, on top of that, I'm eating nothing but dried beef, and the fat helped, you know, with the texture and, you know, the flavor. So I'm not eating just completely dried beef all the time. But I noticed that it took a lot more water intake in order to help myself digest that. The second problem I already found by the second day of, you know, and probably even right before dinner, whenever I started thinking about eating dinner, I found that the protein had filled me up. So I'd eaten all that protein for the breakfast meal, then done a lot of physical activity, and the protein had filled me up. And not only that, but whenever I do physical activity, I kind of lose my appetite just a little bit, which is not a bad thing in most cases, except for whenever you need to capture as many calories as possible in one day for this physical activity. So then I'm sitting there at dinner time on the second day of the hunt, and I could not force myself to eat anymore. Although I ended up doing it, but I was literally force feeding myself because the protein had me so satiated, you know, that I was now already on the second day in a struggle to make sure I'm getting enough calories. So at this point, I'd eaten about half of the first day's meal. I'd eaten about half of the second day's meal. So I'm basically only taking in about 1,000 calories for this hunt, you know, so far in 2 days worth of doing some mild hiking. The second day's hike was actually pretty brutal in the morning. Actually, I felt great in the morning, but then towards the afternoon, it started catching up with me. I started getting a little tired. I wasn't showing it, you know, I was muscling through, but I could feel it. I was like, okay, like, I'm not hungry. I'm totally satiated, but whew, man, my body's a little exhausted. You know, I wasn't sore, which was a good thing. And I think the protein actually helped with me not being sore. But yeah, like I was definitely struggling a little bit whenever it came to the overall exhaustion of my body. And that exhaustion really came from just lack of calories. So the third day comes in, and again, we had the same thing where we get up in the morning, we go to a spot, we sit, we go chase, and then we sit down and have some breakfast. After eating breakfast, then we get back and we do some more hunting, and then finally we show up back at camp right before it gets dark. You know, have our water, drink your coffee or whatever we need, have dinner and everything. And so on this night, I was feeling already so short on calories, and again so full of protein, that I was really wondering if this was going to be a good idea or if I was going to make it through the rest of the hunt. So what I ended up doing was I had a packet of beef fat with me, and so what I did is I took that and I mixed it with the pemmican to give myself extra, almost make like a beef stew out of the pemmican. So I poured some hot water in there, mixed it all together, added some extra beef fat in there for some more calories, and consumed that. Unfortunately, I didn't have anything to season it with, so it was like the most plain Jane beef stew. I didn't have enough salt in it, which would have definitely helped the flavor and helped with overall with the electrolyte intake and everything. Didn't have enough salt, so next time I'm definitely bringing salt with me. So it was this bland, mealy beef soup. And honestly, I regret doing that. The reason I decided to kind of make it into like a beef soup was because I'd heard that Cliff Gray said he had done that, and he said it worked out pretty well. Yeah, I imagine it would be okay if he had, again, had that powdered protein in there, that powdered protein for the pemmican and the powdered beef. But again, mine had gotten to the point where I couldn't, with my food processor, I couldn't get it to that consistency. It was kind of still grainy and mealy, and so that was a little bit of an issue there. But again, I muscled through. I got it in, I got it down, I ate it. Okay, so day 3 is in the books. We're going good. That day was in the books. Everything was good. The next morning we got up and we did the same thing. We went to a spot during the dark. We had, this time it was a much more flatland hike. It was a long, about 3 or 4 mile hike, through some up and down terrain. But overall it was much easier. But I was already starting to feel, again, the overall fatigue set in. And that fatigue really just comes from the point where your body is having such a low calorie intake that you are losing weight, you're losing that body fat, and you're just getting overly exhausted. And that's where I found myself. I could tell I'd already lost a few pounds of weight by the 3rd day. So we went through the 3rd day, we did our hike and everything. Again, we didn't see any elk. We come to find out later, we ended up talking towards the end of the hunt, we ended up talking to an old man that was on the hill, and he said that basically Utah, especially that part of Utah there, had a really hard winter the year before. And so a lot of the elk and the antelope populations had actually died. They literally found a lot of them frozen to death, huddled together, trying to keep warm. And so their populations were extremely low, but we didn't find that out almost till the end of the hunt. So we go forward with this hunt. When, like I say, we stop, we eat some meals. I'm really surviving on those beef chunks because they had extra big chunks of fat in them, where it's not mixed in as much in there, but it's big chunks of fat, and that fat was just so satiating to me. I just absolutely loved it. But again, I found that, having to eat all that protein really made it hard to get calories on board. After doing all that, we did a really easy day 4 where we kind of took a break. We take it slow. We ended up going to a spot and sitting at a lake, watching this watering hole, hoping that we saw something. Again, no elk came through. So then day 5 comes up. We drove to another spot, to Hoop Lake, and then we hiked in from there. The rain was really bad, the weather was bad, so we waited a little while. Then we finally, about midday, we went in and threw all our stuff on our backs and we headed up the mountain. It was about 40 degrees at this point, and it was just pissing down rain on us. I mean, it was like, whenever I was looking at my gear, I was like, do I want to put my rain gear on and stay dry from the rain, and then maybe like sweat a little bit and have sweaty clothes that are wet and cold? Or do I want to be completely drenched from the rain and maybe have it dry out a little bit? Or would I want to just get wet from the rain and still be cold and wet? So trying to give myself the best option, I put the rain gear on, hoping to fend off hypothermia. And it didn't matter what I did, I was still getting wet that day. So my rain gear is something I'm definitely going to invest in very heavily next year and make sure I have all the right tools for the job, because the rain gear that I had worked, kept me dry, but it was very hot and I was sweating. It was 40 degrees outside, and just from the physical exertion of heading up that mountain with all that gear on our backs, I was sweating. By the end of that hike, on the 5th day, I had so few calories left in my body that I was just exhausted. I was at the bottom of what I could do. My feet felt like concrete. My hands were losing grip on my bow. I was cold. I was exhausted. And I didn't even have enough calories in my body to keep myself warm. So naturally, that put me in a very difficult position where I was overly exhausted. And by the time we got up there, we made camp, we set up, and I was just piss ass, just tired. I could not move. We got the camp laid up. I told the guys, I warmed up a little bit of water. I ate a little bit of meat, a little bit of the pemmican, and I just told the guys, I've got to go lay down because I've got nothing left in the tank. And I was literally just tapped out. So we go in there and we eat a little bit of dinner and everything. And after eating dinner, I go in my sleeping bag and I can't warm up. I'm so frozen. Like, my feet are numb from being wet and cold. Like I say, my socks are just drenched. And so I get my sleeping bag and I just can't warm up. This is a 40 degrees. It's 40 degrees outside, and this is a 20-degree sleeping bag. So I immediately knew that something was wrong, and I felt like I was on the borderline of having hypothermia. So what I did is I took off all my wet clothes, put on all new dry clothes, huddled up inside of my sleeping bag, pulled the hood over my head and tightened it down, so I was like mummied up inside that sleeping bag. and I was still not warming up. My overexhausted state, accompanied with the cold temperatures and having been wet for so many hours, it was getting grim for me. I had this feeling before one time whenever I was hiking in Tennessee in the Smoky Mountains. I had the same thing. Way too much exertion on my body, way too few calories, so my body can't warm itself back up, nearing that point of hypothermia where I am violently shivering and I can't control it. Then the next thing that I had the issue of is that we had drinking all of our water on our way up the mountain, so we had no water. Thankfully, it had been raining a little bit, so there were some puddles laying around. And the guys, actually, 2 guys, Dean and Chris, that I was with, they saved my life because they went and they hiked about a quarter of a mile, got a bunch of water, about 6 liters of water for us, brought it back to the camp, filled up my Nalgene with hot water, and threw it in my sleeping bag. Because of my inability to thermoregulate from being so low on calories, that right there, having that hot water bottle in there, really warmed me up fast, and it really honestly probably saved my life, or saved me at least a trip from having to hit that SOS button on my Garmin. The next morning, we did the same thing, had some drinks, had some coffee. We woke up and our boots were literally frozen solid. I couldn't even put my boots on my feet to get up and go pee in the morning, so it was a pretty sad state. But thankfully, all we did that morning, we were able to just get up, warm up, dry our stuff off a little bit from the little bit of sun that came up, and then we packed up and headed back down the mountain, and just unfortunately called this hunt not a failure, but we definitely learned a lot of valuable lessons from this hunt. What was the problem? So the problem that I had was that I was eating way too much protein and not having enough calories. So the next time that I go and I do these kind of hunts, I'm going to definitely bring more calories on there. So I'm going to bring a little bit more, like what I'm going to call like emergency rations, something with a little bit of carbohydrates, some honey, some almond butter, something like that that's quick, that's easy, puts calories and fat in my body, and will help me out really well. As far as the carnivore diet goes, can I say that it's not possible to do the carnivore diet on this kind of hunt? No, I'm definitely not going to say that. And if we had done the same thing that we did the first 4 days, then I would have been perfectly fine doing the carnivore diet the entire time. But it was that 5th day that just pushed me over the edge, because I've already not been sleeping, already been exhausted, already been in a severe calorie deficit for like 4 days. And then we did that huge physical activity, that huge physical undertaking. That was what put me over the edge. So all in all, here's my total thoughts on this. Make sure that you get plenty of calories. Make sure that you pack calories that are, I'm not going to tell you what to pack. I'm not going to give you nutritional advice here, but make sure that you're counting your calories. Make sure you go and figure out how much, and exactly how many calories are in the beef fat. Make sure how many calories are in that meat you're packing in. Make sure if you're packing in the right meat, make sure you're packing in something a little extra, something a little unique. Make sure you're getting enough calories for that high exertion that you're going to be going through during your hunt. Don't try to save weight and miss out on important calories that you need to really execute that hunt or that hike successfully in the backcountry. So again, guys, stay healthy, stay empowered, make sure that you bring enough calories. I haven't really researched it right now, but I'm going to put on the list at the very end of this video. I'm going to put a little list of things that, probably would have been better alternatives to bring than just pemmican and, just the dehydrated beef chunks. So again, I think there's definitely some things I could have done better to supplement the diet. So if you have comments below, this is what I love about this channel, is I can talk about the carnivore diet and the successes and now the failures that I've had during this diet. And you guys are going to come, the community is going to come, and we're going to share, and we're going to build each other up, and we're going to talk in the comment section down below about what has worked for you, what you suggest, and something we can put to the test. So if you make some really good suggestions down in the comments, guys, I will be the guinea pig for you. I will you tell me what I should have eaten, and I will try that, and I'll test it with some physical activity and stuff like that, and I'll follow up. Maybe I'll post some YouTube shorts and stuff about that. So follow along with the channel, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you want to share your carnivore journey, I've got several carnivore videos in this playlist down below, so go ahead and check that out. Share your thoughts with the community, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking around. And as always, guys, keep defying the odds.